Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where I've got a new structure project going for the ON30 Gruesome Gulch layout. Even spooks need a place to stay, so this time out, it's the Eternal Rest Hotel. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I've never been that crazy about this particular design. I was in a hurry when I slapped this together, this mock-up, and it's some bits and pieces from other structures that I designed over the years, all kind of rolled together into one. And so for this build now, I've gone back to the drawing board, all the way back to the beginning, and redesigned the hotel from the ground up to fit in that specific space. And my philosophy is, if you're faced with something like a tall, skinny space for a structure, you should lean into it and build a tall, skinny hotel. And that's just what we're going to do. So the structure is going to be, it's only about 3 3/4 inches across, and then about 2 inches wide at its narrowest part, and about 6 inches tall. And the parts I've got here to get started, I've got some core pieces to build a core for the model, interior walls, and that's out of some 1/16 of an inch thick MDF, which is my favorite thing to use for that. And then for the siding, got some O-scale clapboard. Got lots of doors and window pieces. As usual for assembly, I'm using some tight bond wood glue, which I like to apply with a small paintbrush. Giving myself some tabs and slots to make my life a little easier on assembly here. I'll go ahead and slide the floor in here. And the hole here I've pre-drilled with the laser for bringing in the wiring for some interior lighting. While I wait for the glue to dry on this MDF core, I thought I would go ahead and get started on building the windows. And each one of these windows is made up of 9 individual pieces, so they take a minute to put together. So the first thing is this piece of trim goes on to the backing to make the window casement. It gives it that milled look, and this gable gets built up even more. A couple of additional trim pieces, and then this piece goes on top of that. And then I can start building up the sill with this piece. And then I want to put in the top sash from the back. Not the bottom yet, just the top. And then there's a little trim piece, a little piece of molding to finish off this gable, which is about 1 scale inch wide. And then a very similar piece down at the bottom end to finish off the windowsill. And the 2 downstairs windows go together in just the same way, except they're a little simpler because they don't have that fancy gable on top. The rear window isn't quite as fancy as the ones in the front, but still goes together in pretty much the same way. And the front door is kind of special. I decided to make the window and the door in the shape of a coffin. You know, we got a theme going here in Gruesome Gulch. And the door frame goes together just like the windows, with a trim layer on top of the base layer. For the transom above the door, I decided to give it some angry eyes. Then when you put the frame together with the door, the whole thing looks like a face. The color scheme on the structure is going to be a kind of a dusty blue and gray. So I'm going to go ahead and paint all of these windows, and I've got a couple other little gable trim pieces for the roof with some of this Rust-Oleum chalked aged gray. Now, returning to this now, just want to go around with my sanding block, make sure these corners are nice and square and smooth. Now I'm ready to start putting that clapboard on. I'll line this up with these window openings, just so. These walls are divided up into top and bottom pieces, and that's basically because the clapboard stock that I had, the Kapler clapboard, was only 4 inches wide, so not really wide enough to span the whole height of the structure. I'm always in the habit of double checking my clapboard when I'm putting clapboard on to make sure the claps are going in the right direction. It's really a bummer if you glue it on upside down. On the bottom half of this back wall, I'm just using some plain scribed siding rather than clapboard because it's not going to show. And before I glue the end pieces on, I want to take my sanding block once again, make sure everything is nice and square and flush. On these, I want to align it with the peak of the roof, like so. Can never have too many clamps, my friends. One problem of using clapboard siding is that when you go to put trim on, it's going to sit up above, it's going to sit on top of the clapboards, and that's not very realistic. So what I like to do to solve that is go in and file all the claps off at the corners so that when I put my 1x6 trim on here, it will fit recessed down in there below the claps, just like it would on a prototypical structure. And when all 4 corners are done, looks like that. Now I think I'm ready to get some paint on this. And the color I'm going to use is this Rust-Oleum Chalked Coastal Blue. Some of you may remember if you watched my build of the Gruesome Gulch excursion cars. This is the same color I used on those. Now that this paint's dry, I'm going to go over everything with a wire brush, all this clapboard. And this will add a little bit of grain, but it will also distress the boards and take a little bit of the paint off. Then I want to go back over a lot of the boards using the edge of my hobby knife to pull a lot of the paint off, right down to the bare wood in some places. Now I'll use my hobby knife or a razor blade. I actually find a razor blade a little bit better for this, to cut up underneath some of the claps and split them and pull them up a little bit, break some pieces off. Basically what I'm trying to do with all this is reveal little bits and pieces of the bare wood underneath. And now that I've got it all broken up and falling apart, I'm going to go over all the walls with my India ink and rubbing alcohol stain. And that'll sink back in there underneath those claps into the places where I removed the paint. It should give a nice weathered look. And that's how it's looking after that step. Now, take some light gray. This is some apple barrel granite gray. I'm going to dry brush it, just hitting the edges of the claps. See how it brings out that detail? Now I want to go ahead and start putting these 4x6 trim pieces in. And now before I install the doors and windows, I want to give them the same treatment with the black wash. See how it soaks back in, brings out the details. I've decided I'm going to install the door first. And I'm just painting the lock plate a little bit of brass. This is Drop that in there. I want this to be like smoked glass, so got some Avery label material I'm going to put on this piece of acetate. Now I'm applying a thin layer of some Zap canopy glue. Now I'll use my hobby knife and add some cracks to this glass in the door. Shouldn't be, you know, clean and pristine. I want a little, just a splash of color up here behind the transom window. So I'm going to glue in a piece of orange construction paper. There we go. Angry eyes. I'm going to drill this all the way through. And I've got a little track nail that I can use as a doorknob. A little dab of CA on the back. Trim it off in the back. And we'll just get a little dab of brass paint on there. Now I can just glue this right into the opening, I think. Now I'm finishing up glazing the windows. I'm actually on the last one. This is taking a little bit longer than it would take, you know, I guess on a normal structure, something that's not supposed to be haunted, because I want, you know, almost all of the panes of glass to be broken. So I just use my hobby knife here and go over the pieces of acetate, cut some pieces away, some breaks. These are supposed to be you know, old-fashioned double-hung windows, and the way those work, these big casements on each side, there'd be pulleys in there with ropes and counterweights, so you could pull the bottom sash up or the upper sash down, and they would, you know, stop and balance. They really don't make them like this anymore. But what would often happen in older buildings is that rope would rot and break, and that lower sash would come, you know, crashing down. So you would often see them held up with something, you know, a piece of wood or some sort of, you know, cinder block or whatever. That's a great detail to add to older buildings. I thought it would be funny. If you remember this guy, his top half was in the water tank over in Gruesome Gulch. This is his bottom half, and I told you I had plans for him. I thought it would be pretty funny if, you know, the window was held up by a femur or one of it, or maybe a thigh bone. That's what I'm going to use here. So I'll drop this last piece of glazing in. I'll glue on the back of this. Lay it on top of the lower sash. Thigh bone's connected to the window bone. Oh, CA on each end. There we go. That's the general idea. Now I'll take all these windows and give them a quick coat of some Rust-Oleum matte finish, so they'll look a little bit dirty and grimy on the back. And now I can go ahead and glue each one of these windows into the building. Now I can finish off the corner trim. This is some O-scale 1x6 that I'm using here. And I'll come back and stain all this to darken it up and match the rest of the trim and the windows and doors. And I've got this fancy Victorian trim for the gable ends of the building. I've added some 4x4s to make it stand up three-dimensionally above the surface of the wall. Creating some porch posts where I'm just using some O-scale 4x4 stock, and now I'm applying an overlay of some laser cut pieces. This is some 25 1/1000ths of an inch thick laser board that I'm using for this. And these will be painted the same gray color as all the rest of the trim and installed right on there. And it should look pretty cool. It should be in keeping with the, quasi-Victorian Gothic revival architecture I've got going on here. I'm also building up the balcony railings. And those just get built up. This is a laser cut piece, same material, and a couple of 1x2s. And then I want to add some 4x4 posts to this, one on each side. And then a piece of 2x4 along the top. Now I want to drill straight down into the tops of these 4x4 posts. Just take the top of a dress pin, the kind with the ball heads, cut that off and put that in there just like that. And I just finished this. This is the frame for the balcony. As you can see, it's not very deep. It's only about 3 scale feet deep. And I just made it up with some 4x6 and used some 1x2s for some molding around the edge. I've cut and stained some lengths of 8x8. And I'm going to use those to make a foundation for the structure. And this will also it'll extend out the front and be a support for the front board sidewalk, the front porch as well. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and glue the structure under this frame right now. Now I've got some 1/32 of an inch thick basswood that I cut for the front porch, the boardwalk. Now I can add the decking to the upstairs balcony also. Once again, I'm breaking and removing some of the boards. I'm going to build the rest of it right in place. Found you can add some nice weathering to these porch posts just by taking off a little bit of the paint with my emery board. As you can see, I went back and broke and removed several of the uprights. Give it the look of kind of broken teeth there. All right. I've started work on the roof now, and I want it to be removable, so I've built an inner core out of some black foam core that just fits right down in there like that. And now I've got some panels for the roof itself that I've cut from some chipboard. And I've done the same thing again that I did on some of the earlier Gruesome Gulch structures. Made it so I can make it look like there's a hole in the roof there. I'm doing this kind of the lazy way, but it's an accurate way to do it, rather than taking lots of measurements and making sure the roof panels are in the right place. I'm just putting it on like that, and once I get it aligned, I can lift the whole thing off like so, and that should be perfectly aligned for for the next time I put the roof on. There's a little trick you can do. You see how the ends of the roof here are not lining up perfectly. You can take a piece of paper like I just did here, cut it about 1/2 inch wide and score it down the middle and fold it over. And you just drop that on the top like that. And that should pull that roof peak together, hold it. It's kind of like a paper clamp, really. Now I can glue in these decorative roof trusses. Well, I've just spent the last hour or so figuring out the compound angles on these dormers above these upstairs windows. Before I finish with the roof, I want to show you how I'm doing the curtains. Yeah, I didn't forget the curtains. And you've probably seen me use this technique before. Got some white crepe paper. Actually, this stuff is great because it's old, so it's kind of yellowed. So it's got some natural weathering to it, which I like. And I cut off a piece. This is 2-inch wide crepe paper, so cut off a piece that's about 1.5 inches. Put some glue in there, just at the top and on the side edge. So fold that over. I'm going to rip the bottom off, and then take my hobby knife with a sharp number 11 blade, and just kind of start, shredding it like this down along the bottom. And just glue that in behind the window, just at the top of the wall here. There we have it. I don't have any crazy special effects planned for this one, but I do want to put a light in here. Just kind of a ghostly glow coming from the interior. And I want it to be mostly visible only in the upstairs windows. So I made a partition out of some black foam core. And I'm just going to put this in here. I'm just going to glue this in about 3/4 of an inch behind the front door. So that will block the LED. You won't be able to see the lamp itself in there, but you'll just see the glow from it through the windows. I've just been trimming out the rest of the roof all along the edges with some O-scale 1x4, and now I'm going back and painting all that gray so it will blend with the rest of the building. Now to finish the roof, I'm going to use some Bar Mills dark brown paper shingles, which I've used on a couple of the other structures for the Gulch. But before I do that, I want to make some allowances for the chimneys. I have a pair of Grant Line styrene chimneys that I just assembled. And now I'm cutting some square holes up here at the top of the roof so I can install them just down in here like that. Good color to use on brick like this is just some flat red primer. Makes a good base coat anyway. While I wait for the paint to dry on those chimneys, get in here and shingle this roof. The most complicated part, of course, is working around these dormers. So I'm going to do that first. Show you my method for finishing off these brick chimneys. First, I'm painting on a very diluted light gray. Once you get it on there, I actually just use my finger, wipe across the surface of the bricks to wipe most of it off. Yeah, you do get paint all over your hands, but these are the sacrifices we make for our art. Next, I've got a couple of different colors. Got a kind of a beige or light brown. I'm going to add a decorative stripe of the same color down where these bricks are protruding out. Then I've got a little darker shade of red. This is some apple barrel chocolate bar. Go in and pick out several of the bricks here and there with the darker shade. To finish these off, I want the look of flashing around the base. So I'm cutting some Bristol board. Bristol board is a artist's paper. Not as thick as illustration board, but thicker than like regular bond paper or printer paper. Just gonna use a black Sharpie to color these.
And I've scored this piece so I could bend it in the middle. And then when I, do the final weathering at the end with colored chalks, I can make this look like old weathered copper. Now, rather than a row of cap shingles up at the top, I wanted to add some Victorian gingerbread. So I laser cut these little trim piece and just kind of capping it off with some 1x6. Got all my weathering chalks out here now because it is final weathering time. A bit of black, some light blue. Make a nice blue-gray out of those. And what the chalks do, besides weathering it, is it kind of ties everything together. Don't really need to do much more down here on the rest of the building. I might do a little bit on the sign, but I've been weathering as I go all along. So below these chimneys, I want some black soot. And then I want a whole bunch of soot up here on the tops of these chimneys. This is probably going to take a couple of passes. So I'm going to lock down this first pass with some Rust-Oleum matte finish. I just want to add a little green, a little verdigris below this copper flashing. Now I want to lift up some of these shingles, oldest trick in the book. Now I want to break some of these up here on top of this Victorian trim, this gingerbread, because this stuff always breaks.
Back over here on the layout, I just finished installing a little blue LED. This is a 3mm blue LED, 9 to 12 volt, sticking out of a piece of soda straw that I've embedded down into the surface here, and that will just come up right through a hole in the bottom of the structure, just to add a nice little spooky blue glow, and just like the rest of the structures in town. For a final bit of detail, I want to add a couple of ravens. Ravens are ubiquitous here in Gruesome Gulch. I'm just giving this guy a little dry brushing with some light gray to bring out that wonderful feather detail. These are 3D prints from miniprints.com. Check them out. I should be able to install this guy with just a couple little drops of Eileen's tacky glue. And I'll put her friend down here on the balcony railing. Well, I'm going to call that done. Let's go add it to the layout. And there it is, the Eternal Rest Hotel. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And that's a wrap on the Eternal Rest Hotel here in Gruesome Gulch. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell if you'd like to see more. You can also follow Thunder Mesa over on Instagram at thunder.mesa and see everything that's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. And of course, if you really like what we're doing here at the channel and want to show your support, you can head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa, like these nice folks did, and show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends, and adios for now.